여러분 안녕하십니까, 돌콩입니다. 영국 여행 잘 마치고 지금 시애틀에 잠깐 와 있습니다.
Welcome to Seattle, where the local time is 12:14 p.m. Please stay seated with your seatbelt.
Yeah? Is that expensive? Yeah, I guess so.
You make it real, you're the one I want. And to me, we are just like art.
살면서 약간 피하게 되는 사람의 유형이 두 가지가 있는데, 하나는 내가 한때는 말이야 하시는 분들.
You used to be big.
I am big. It's the pictures that got small.
다른 하나는 다른 사람의 말 절대로 안 듣고 자기 이야기 하시는 분들.
How lovely to see all your bright, happy faces smiling up at me.
이 두 유형의 공통점이 있는데, 그게 뭔가 하면 바로 배움을 멈춘 사람들이라는 지점이에요.
If you're questioning my authority in my own classroom. Not at all, Dolores. Merely your medieval methods.
과거의 한 시절로부터 무언가를 배워서 나아진 게 없기 때문에 그 한 시절에 집착하게 되고 과거에 머물러 살게 되는 것이고, 또 나는 이미 내가 살아가는 데 필요한 모든 것들을 알고 있다라는 전제가 있기 때문에 다른 사람의 이야기를 사실 듣는 데는 노력이 들어가잖아요. 그 노력을 기울일 필요가 없다라고 느끼는 건 아닌가라는 생각을 할 때가 있습니다. 평생 배우는 사람, 라이프타임 러너로 사는 건 참 좋은 일이죠. 무엇보다 우리를 희망하게 합니다. 오늘 무언가를 배우면 내일의 나는 조금 더 나아져 있을 것이고, 그 살짝 나은 버전의 나로 세상을 산다는 건 어떤 느낌일까 궁금해지니까 내일을 기다리게 되죠. 삶이 현재 진행형이라는 그 감각을 갖게 도와주는 것 같습니다. 그리고 두 번째로, 무언가를 배울 때 삶의 방향성이 생긴다라는 생각을 참 많이 하거든요. 내게 필요한 것, 내게 중요한 것, 그리고 그렇지 않은 것, 내게 방해가 되는 것들, 그 사이에 구분이 조금 더 명확해지는 그 느낌이 저는 참 좋더라고요. 그 구분을 명확히 하는 것만으로도 삶이 굉장히 간단해진다라는 느낌을 받을 때가 있습니다. 근데 문제는 평생 배우는 사람, 라이프타임 러너로 사는 게 그리 쉽지 않다는 데 있습니다. 첫 번째로, 어른이 되면 우리는 저마다 나름의 생존의 방법을 터득하게 되죠. 그렇기 때문에 새로운 걸 배우지 않아도 죽지 않는 상태에서 살게 됩니다. 그런데 무언가 새로운 걸 배울 때 그건 사실 굉장히 불편한 감정들을 동반하잖아요. 실수하게 되고 자꾸 까먹게 되고 계속 지는 느낌이 들고 잘하는 사람과 나를 비교하게 되고, 그런 약간 불편한 감정들을 늘 배움이 동반을 하게 되는데, 이걸 하지 않아도 생존에 지장이 없는 상태인데 이걸 굳이 내가 이 불편한 감정을 느끼면서까지 해야 되나 라는 이제 의심? 생각을 하게 되죠. 그리고 어른이 되면 신경을 써야 할 일도 많습니다. 밥벌이도 해야 되고, 세금, 공과금, 아이들 문제도 있고, 부모님, 미래 계획 등등 신경 써야 될 게 정말 너무나 많은데, 시간을 내서 무언가를 계속 배운다는 게 쉽지가 않죠. 그러다 보니까 노력을 들이는데 나이가 들수록 살짝 인색해지는 게 있는 게 아닌가라는 생각을 해요. 그러면 어떤 일이 생기냐 하면, 가장 효율적으로 무언가를 배우는 방법, 무언가를 배우는 최고의 방법에 대한 집착이 생기게 되면서 계속해서 그 최고의 방법을 찾게 되고, 사실은 배움은 시작하기도 전에 그 방법만 찾느라 평생을 낭비하게 되는 결과를 초래하기도 하죠. 그리고 심적으로, 시간적으로 여유가 없으면 없을수록 마음이 더 조급해지죠. 빨리 잘하고 싶어져요. 그런데 많은 경우에 무언가를 배울 때에는 들어가야 하는 실수의 양, 시행착오의 양이 있고, 사실 그건 다른 사람이 대신 해줄 수가 없는 부분이죠. 그래서 그 절대적으로 들어가야 하는 수고를 견디는 그 과정을 견디지 못하다 보니까 무언가를 배우기 시작하더라도 중간에 그만두는 경우가 많지 않나 싶습니다. 어떻게 하면 배움을 지속할 수 있을까? 배움에 대한 배움에 대해서 저도 관심이 이제 많이 있는 편인데, 이에 대해서 눈을 확 뜨게 해준 책이 있다면 이 책은 오래된 책입니다. 스캇 영의 울트라러닝이라는 책이에요. 스캇은 MIT 챌린지라고 해서 MIT 컴퓨터공학과의 4년 그 코스를 혼자 1년 독학하는 그 프로그램을 본인이 만들어서 그 과정을 블로그에 이제 기록을 하게 되면서 굉장히 유명해진 사람이죠. 그리고 나서 이제 울트라러닝이라는 책이 나왔는데, 만두 씨가 스캇을 굉장히 오랫동안 팔로우 해오면서 저도 이제 알게 됐어요. 그리고 울트라러닝 책이 나왔을 때 스칸한테 제가 연락을 해서 한번 이야기를 나눴으면 좋겠다라고 해서 이야기를 하고 이제 친구가 된 케이스인데, 근데 지난달에 스칸한테 메일이 왔어요. 새 책이 나온다. 그래서 책을 보내줬어요. Get Better at Anything 이라는 새 책인데 역시 배움에 관한 책입니다. 잘 배우는 방법, 배움에 대한 배움, 그에 대한 열정이라면 전 세계 그 누구보다 큰 열정을 가지고 있는 친구라고 생각합니다. 오랜만에 스캇과 새 책에 대해서 이야기를 나누면서 제가 가지고 있던 배움에 대한 궁금증들, 평생 배우는 사람으로 살고 싶지만 한편으로 느끼는 배움에 대한 두려움들, 최고의 방법에 대한 그 집착 때문에 시작하지 못하는 그 답답함, 빨리 잘하고 싶은 그 조급함을 처리하는 방법 등등 여러 가지 주제에 대해서 이야기를 나눴습니다. 재미있게 봐주셨으면 좋겠네요.
Most people have not seen this book yet. I don't know whether you got a chance to look through the review copy at all and have some thoughts, but
Got it too.
oh wow, you got the book. I got one too. There we go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then e-copy as well. Really enjoyed reading it.
Oh, thank you.
Oh god, like I should read it again, I think.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of the movie that you got after waiting for like, for years and you don't want to finish it in
Oh,
one
that's
sitting.
that's too kind of you. Well, that's what you like to hear from people rather than, so I got through it.
Yeah, give me a second. I should just introduce this guy to you.
Yeah, of course, of course.
I'm a big fan. I follow you from a long time ago. I recently was like going through my computer, old stuff.
Yeah.
And I found this like learning on steroids.
Oh yeah, wow. You really, really have been with me for a long time then.
So good to meet
Oh,
you.
Oh, good to
luck
meet you
with-
too.
With the book.
I hope you enjoy the book. If she lets you read a copy or when your copy
I would
comes in.
never. I'm just kidding. One super interesting thing about you, I think, is that you are super passionate about learning. I mean, we knew it from the MIT challenge, and you're like at the different level
Yeah.
with this. And I was always curious what motivates you so much to be involved or to keep being involved in the learning process, because
Yeah.
I see a lot of people who kind of stopped learning things because
Yeah.
learning inevitably comes with some uncomfortable feeling, like you forget things and you feel lost and you feel mistaken and all these things, and people tend to avoid those kind of feeling.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it is really easier and comfortable to do what you already know or what you already
Mhm.
experienced. So I played a lot of music that I used to listen in my 20s, and I
Yeah.
will watch the Netflix without any like interest, but I watched that Netflix show like 20 times, but I'll be still
Yeah.
watching it again just to find comfort. It kind of makes sense to some extent, because I was like thinking of explore, exploit trade-off as well. For the efficiency's sake, we explore a little bit, but from some point,
Yeah.
we lead by exploiting what we already know and what we already experience. And like, what is the whole point of exploring more? Because I already have enough to exploit. Then,
Yeah.
it is more efficient to rely on what I already know and experience. So people stop learning a lot. I wonder why it is so important to keep learning, and what motivates you so much about learning new things and keep learning new things more importantly.
Yeah. I mean, well, in some ways, it's probably just how I'm hardwired. I feel like I've always been very interested in learning things. I'm always very I like that, that daydream. You're like, what if I was really good at this? Like people do that sometimes. You're just like you see someone do something really well and you're like, what if I could do that? What if I could be like that? Sometimes that enthusiasm can run away with you because you have more enthusiasm for the idea than for actually executing on it. But I'd like to hope that at least in my life, I've had some times where I've been able to ground that down and focus for a period of time to make some progress. You were talking about explore, exploit, and I think this is also a really good point, because often when we're considering approaching things, and I think about this very much in this book, there's sort of a tension between like learning something new and getting better at something that you're already sort of familiar with. And so that's something I've seen in my own life, like ultra learning. When I was writing about that book, the focus was very much on like projects started from scratch. Like, I don't know anything about this, or I know very little about this, or my level of proficiency is quite bad, and then trying to get, to some intermediate level in some short period of time. And I think as I've gotten older and I've like expanded my interests, and I've got like all these sort of things that like, well, I started doing that. I have shifted more towards, I think maybe what you could say is the title of this book is Getting Better at Anything. This focus on how do you you pick up something that you're already working on and get a little better at it? Like, what's that incremental approach from wherever you are, or just things you do every day that you want to get better at? Like, I've been writing for years and years, and still I feel that kind of like, you see people who are like, oh, this person's a good writer, and I wish I could write like that.
Scott, when I talked to you 4 years ago about ultra learning, like, and I asked you about how to keep the motivation, right, throughout the learning process. And I think the answer that you gave me back then was like, a lot of people try to learn without any clear goal. Like, I just want to be better at this, and I want to just try this. And you start, the motivation wears off, and you kind of quit.
Yeah.
But let's say that I want to use this skill for A, B, and C, then it is a lot to keep motivated throughout the process. Do you still think that is the position that you have?
I want to preface it, and there's nothing wrong with like, oh, I'd just like to be better at this, and like that's the starting point for a lot of things. But I think the idea that I would continue to hold today is that improvement is often more specific than we realize. So it's hard to talk about like just getting better at a really abstract ability in general. So like, I want to be a better communicator, for instance. The problem is that isn't really a skill. There's, certainly people who are better communicators than others. So you can observe it as an ability out in the world. But in terms of improving it yourself, what being a better communicator is going to mean is breaking down to being better at a lot of much more manageable components. So there's like being a better listener. And then what does being a better listener mean? Well, it's like not interrupting people would be like one sub skill in being a better listener. Another one would be like active listening. So you really understand what they're saying, or, being empathetic, and like, there's all sorts of like being a better listener. We break it down to like 15 different components. And so the idea here is that if you're trying to get better at something, having a concrete goal, which would be like some sort of objective outcome in the world, like, I want to be able to ski down this particular mountain or this run. I want to publish a successful book. It's going to involve lots of different skills, but the goal itself helps constrain which ones you're going to focus on. Or if you're trying to improve, you kind of isolate a little bit, like, this is exactly what I'm trying to get better at in this session. That's so important because, again, if you construe the goals really broadly, really vaguely, it's very hard to see whether you're making progress at them. It's very hard to like get that motivation of like, oh yeah, I'm getting this. I'm doing this right now. And that is important. That, positive reinforcement is very important for continuing, especially if you're doing something that's difficult.
Now I feel like it's a lot more clear and supported by what you said in the new book. Like, I think when you have that clear, concrete goal and intention behind the learning process, I think you know what to learn by seeing. Also, what you should try specifically. It gives a lot of clarity. And I'm thinking about what James Clear wrote in his book. He said, like, people think that they don't have motivation, but usually they lack of clarity. And once you have that clarity, you will get a lot more motivated and keep going. And that kind of concrete goal is what you give that clarity throughout this seeing and I think doing process. And we feel a lot less probably lost throughout the process.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I opened the book, the first chapter after the introduction, is about problem solving, is because once I sort of understood the scientific study of problem solving and the basic conceptual framework of like how people who study problem solving think about problem solving, it really opened up your mind to like, oh, this is why so many things don't work, right? Or why they're the wrong way of thinking about it. And I think as a species, we're very deeply hardwired to avoid intractable problems, to be in a situation where it's like, well, there's no clear right thing to do. There's this near infinite space of possible actions you could take. Most of them are not going to be effective, and you can just try things at random to get progress. Like, we are hardwired to basically like, don't do those things. That is in our head. Don't do those things. And it's unfortunate when there's that kind of fog of lack of clarity surrounding a goal that you actually want. But it basically means when you have this sort of intractable hedge of problems around something that you actually do desire, there is a real sense that your mind is like, no, it's not worth it. You're not going to, because you're going to get stuck in that hedge and you're not going to be able to go forward. And so a lot of what clarity is doing is you're trying to reduce the problem space down to something tractable, something manageable, something where it's like, oh, but if I do this on a regular basis, I will make progress. I will actually get there. And so for learning, I think that's just, it's such a huge part, because for many skills, they are complicated. There's lots of little parts. There's lots of little kind of nuances and difficulties. And while, yeah, sometimes you just start doing it and you get positive reinforcement and you keep working on it and you make progress. for, I would say, the majority of cases, it's you get into this vast wilderness, you feel overwhelmed. And like, that's why you stay on YouTube and you watch YouTube videos and you don't actually practice, because you're like, I don't know. I don't know what to do here. I don't know how to get better. And so I think if you could be really specific, precise, make it concrete. So it's like, okay, this is what I do next. Then a lot of that dissolves and it's actually a lot easier to get started.
I have this problem of speeding of wanting. I really want to get better at something very fast. So I tend to think about running before being able to walk. I think because of that desire to achieve something very fast, I think a lot of people spend a lot of time for searching. I mean, in your book, it's a seeing stage a little bit.
Yeah.
A lot of people spend a lot of time, sometimes forever, in that stage to find ideal method, perfect way, or fastest way to achieve something. And they never really settle on one approach.
Yeah.
They will have to move on to the do stage from some point, but they will never make that transition because I want to achieve something very fast in the most efficient way. That desire is real. So how do you tame that speed of wanting?
Well, you know what, Sunny? I want to like compliment you on that, because I think that's actually a good quality. That's an admirable quality. You know, when I was doing the research, I have a section where I talk about Tiger Woods, and I was reading his swing coach. His swing coach wrote a memoir of his years working with Tiger, and he was talking about how his attitude was that patience is an overrated virtue. Like this idea of like, well, I just need to be really patient and wait, and then I will get better eventually. This kind of attitude. He thought that was like the worst thing a golfer could have. And his argument was that Tiger had none of that. Like Tiger was like, he wanted to improve and he wanted it immediately. Now, he wasn't just like trying to find a shortcut. He wasn't just like, well, I don't want to put in any effort. It was just this desire to like, I don't want to become good eventually. I want to become good now, and I'm going to do the work now on it. And so I tend to think that's actually good for things, because there is sort of a prevailing trend of what would be the right way to describe it? This sort of hopefulness of, well, I'm not making any progress on and whatever the goal it is now, but if I just do it for 10 years, or if I just put this like really far off in the distance and I keep doing it, eventually I'll succeed. Now, skills take a long time to learn. Depending on the skill, it may take you 10 years to become really good at it. But I think the attitude of the people who get there is usually, what can I do now? What can I do now to improve? How can I integrate my performance? How can I make those improvements now, rather than just, you know what, it's a little daunting. That sounds like a lot of work. I'm going to do that, you know, over this long period of time, as a way of avoiding that kind of necessary difficulty. So I think what you talked about is right, that sometimes people can get stuck into like watching the videos of someone doing something instead of practicing it themselves. I've certainly been guilty of that. And, you know, sometimes that can be a legitimate obstacle to making progress in a skill. But I have to say, in careers, in hobbies, in sports, in life, the people who are sort of eager at like, okay, you know, yes, I'm just starting out with this, but how can I quickly get to that frontier? And they're willing to work hard and do sort of the effort that's required to make that. Those are the people who tend to make rapid progress. Even if it does end up taking them 10 years, they tend to actually get there. Whereas the ones who are like, oh, you know, I'll just put in a little bit of effort, maybe I'll get there, tend to plateau, I think, a lot earlier on.
You have that intention of getting better at something very fast, but you will have to get into the do stage. They never do, then it will never come, actually. The learning doesn't start.
I think that's why you need to have a practice loop. You need to have this sort of alternating cycle of like looking for examples, looking for best practices, trying it out yourself, and getting feedback. And I think whenever you get into a phase where you're doing a lot of one, but you're missing one of those elements, the progress stalls. So we're talking about right here about like just being the online consumer of ideas and content, and this kind of daydreaming about what it would be like to speak French or start a business or finally learn programming or, you know, learn some new hobby. It's very easy to get into that because it's really easy to just consume content and think about doing something without actually doing it. But I think what's also important to contrast is it's also easy to do the opposite. It's easy to get in the situation where you just kind of establish your routine, you just kind of do the same thing and you repeat it a lot, but you're not actually getting that much better, either because you're not getting feedback or because you're not being exposed to like what we're talking about, these best practices, the ways that people do it. So I can think about myself, like I've been writing for about 20 years and I'd like to think that my writing has improved over time. But I think that improvement is almost always hard won through like, I'm going to make a specific push to improve some aspect of my writing. Just the regular writing, showing up and doing an essay every week. I mean, that probably helped for the first year, but then the 19 after that, it's just repetition. It's making it a little bit easier, but it's not making me that much better. And so I think for a lot of us, for the skills that we actually are involved in, absorbed in, we can definitely get into that opposite problem, or you just do something a lot, but you don't actually get that much better at it.
When I think about hard work, right, the immediate image that I have in my mind is a hamster running the wheel, like, right? Like really working hard, but it's not going forward, basically. So like, I'm not scared of putting the hard work. I could do that, but what I'm scared the most is like just doing the work and not moving forward, probably. And then progress is a really slow and sometimes invisible, like language thing. Like I do study Spanish every morning for 30 minutes, but it just doesn't change on an everyday basis. Like you will have to keep putting the effort for a while. And then you feel like, oh, this is not moving forward. I feel like I'm just running the wheel there. So what is on our checklist when we want to make sure that it's not just running the wheel, but we are actually running forward?
I think one of the things is what we already alluded to, which is the problem is that the goal is too big. So like getting better at Spanish, certainly in the beginning when you're learning, like, because basically all languages have this kind of like power law shape where the beginning is very small and it happens all the time. But then as you get bigger and bigger and further out into proficiency, you're learning more obscure words, more obscure phrases. You're getting like slightly more fluent at more basic parts. So yeah, the improvement is going to be more diffuse. You're not going to see as much immediate impact. But there's things like, you know, biting off a particular challenge, like, okay, well, I want to learn, you know, the words related to chemistry. Like maybe I studied some chemistry school, so I want to learn all the words in this language related to chemistry. That's more manageable. Now, all of a sudden, you've kind of taken this big goal, chunked it down to something smaller again. Or I want to get better at, like, you know, using the subjunctive or something like concrete, like specific instance of like, I want to get better at this particular part, and you need to work on it. So I think that is a part of getting better as you get further out. The skill broadens. It becomes something where like improving on it as a whole gets harder because of this kind of exponential growth in knowledge required. So I think you have to take extra effort to identify those little component parts, those little things that you want to work on. And those also allow you to keep track, to kind of maintain some sense of like, okay, you know what? Whatever my Spanish has been B2 for a really long time, getting to C1 is going to be, you know, a couple more years. But, you know, I know all the elements on the periodic table are all the common ones that I know in English or whatever. And I didn't know that before, and I can check that off. Or, you know, I know the characters in Harry Potter or something like that, if you're learning a language where maybe those get translated. So I think those are good ways of doing it, of breaking it down. And for skills like writing or you know, skiing or golfing or something like that, where it's more holistic, it's less like atoms of knowledge, I tend to think about it in terms of, again, like, if I'm trying to improve my writing, I try to narrow it down to like, well, what is it exactly I'm trying to improve? Am I trying to get better at like citing research? Am I trying to get better at like telling a story, describing, you know, characters in a story? Like you can keep narrowing it down and work on it on like a particular attempt. So I'm going to work on a piece that's going to focus me on getting better at this part. And I think that can help you see progress again when you stop seeing it at the really broad level.